The Galactic Council of Superior Beings had a problem. Actually, they had several problems, but the biggest one wore sneakers and kept accidentally solving things that weren't supposed to be solvable. Order! Order! Council leader Vexithara slammed her crystalline gavel against the podium, sending rainbow sparks cascading across the chamber. Her four eyes glowed with the kind of frustrated luminescence that only came from dealing with humans for too long. We are gathered here today to address the persistent issue of species 7834b. You mean the humans? Muttered Chief Strategist Quindar from his floating chair, tentacles nervously wrapping around his datapad. Why can't we just call them humans? Because calling them by name implies they deserve recognition, Vexithara snapped. And after what happened with the Paradox engine last month, I refuse to acknowledge their intelligence. The council chamber filled with uncomfortable shifting. Everyone remembered the Paradox engine incident. The humans had been presented with a philosophical puzzle that had stumped the greatest minds in 17 galaxies for millennia. If an unstoppable force meets an immovable object, what happens? The human representative had stared at it for exactly 3 seconds before responding. They go around each other. Duh. Also, your unstoppable force isn't actually unstoppable if it can be stopped by an immovable object, so your premise is flawed. Can I go home now? The engine had promptly exploded from pure logical embarrassment. Counselor Zefko, Vexithara continued, present your proposal. Zefko materialized in the center of the chamber, all 7 feet of his translucent form quivering with excitement. Esteemed colleagues, I have devised the ultimate test, a puzzle so complex, so mind-bendingly impossible, that even these humans will finally acknowledge our intellectual superiority. Go on, Vexithara said, though her tone suggested she'd heard this before. Behold, Zefko waved his appendages dramatically. The Infinite Recursion Chamber. It combines quantum mechanics, 17-dimensional mathematics, temporal paradoxes, and emotional philosophy into one gloriously unsolvable challenge. Our best minds spent 500 years creating it, and another 200 just trying to remember what the question was supposed to be. And you think this will stump them? Quindar asked skeptically. My dear Quindar, this isn't just a puzzle. It's a masterpiece of controlled impossibility. The chamber responds only to beings of true intellectual superiority. Humans, with their linear thinking and primitive neural pathways, will be utterly helpless. The council murmured approval. Finally, a chance to put these upstart humans in their place. Excellent, Vexithara declared. We'll select a random human specimen and broadcast the entire humiliation across the galaxy. Who knows? Maybe we'll finally get them to stop sending us those irritating improvement suggestions for our universal translator. What was the last one again? Asked Counselor Bleptar. Something about adding a sarcasm detector, Quindar sighed. Apparently they found our diplomatic communications unintentionally hilarious. Vexithara's eyes flared brighter. This ends now. Zefko, prepare your chamber. We'll show the universe once and for all that humans are nothing more than clever animals who occasionally stumble onto the right answer. Should we perhaps consider that they might actually solve it? Quindar ventured nervously. The entire council stared at him in stunned silence. My dear Quindar, Vexithara said sweetly, they're humans. They think duct tape is a legitimate engineering solution and somehow turned arguing on their global communication network into an art form. What could they possibly do that 500 years of our finest intellects couldn't? Famous last words, as it turned out. Alex Murphy was having the kind of Tuesday that made her question her life choices, which was saying something considering she'd made a lot of questionable life choices, like dropping out of engineering school to pursue philosophy, then dropping out of philosophy to pursue retail, which wasn't really something you pursued so much as fell into face first. Currently, she was restocking energy drinks at 3 in the morning at the Gas and Go on Route 47, wondering if the universe had a personal vendetta against her sleep schedule. The fluorescent lights hummed their eternal tune of despair, and the coffee machine made sounds like it was plotting something sinister. Red Bull Monster, whatever this purple thing is supposed to be, she muttered, shoving cans onto shelves with the enthusiasm of someone who'd given up caring about beverage alignment. Do people actually drink this stuff? Or are they just preparing for the apocalypse, one caffeine crash at a time? That's when the spaceship landed in the parking lot. Alex looked out the window at the gleaming silver disc, complete with blinking lights and that distinctive humming sound that every sci-fi movie had taught her to recognize. She checked her watch. 3:17 a.m. "Nope," she said to no one in particular. "Not dealing with this tonight. I don't get paid enough for alien encounters." The door chimed as three figures entered. They were clearly not human, what with the whole floating thing and the excessive number of appendages, but Alex had worked retail long enough that weird customers barely registered anymore. "Greetings, human specimen," announced the tallest one, who seemed to be made of shifting geometric patterns. "I am Zefko, representative of the Galactic Council of Superior Beings. You have been chosen for a great honor." "We're closed," Alex said without looking up from her energy drinks. "Closed? But your illumination devices are functioning, and you are present within the establishment." "Yeah, that's called stocking. I'm not actually supposed to sell you anything until 6 a.m. Union rules." Zefko exchanged confused glances with his companions. "Perhaps you do not understand. We are representatives of a civilization spanning thousands of galaxies." "Good for you. Do you need directions to somewhere that's actually open, or are you just here to monologue in my general direction?" "We require your presence for a test of intelligence that will determine humanity's place in the cosmic order." Alex finally turned around, taking in the full absurdity of three floating aliens in her convenience store at 3 in the morning. "Let me guess. You're going to probe me or make me solve some kind of puzzle that proves how much smarter you are than humans, right? The probe examination is scheduled for after the intelligence assessment." One of the smaller aliens piped up helpfully. "Zeblik," Zefko hissed. "We discussed this. No mentioning the probes until after they agree to come with us." "Right, sorry. There are definitely no probes involved whatsoever," Zeblik said in the least convincing tone possible. Alex stared at them for a long moment. "You know what? Fine. My shift ends in 3 hours anyway, and this is probably more interesting than watching Mrs. Henderson try to buy cigarettes with expired coupons again. But I'm keeping the rest of my energy drink, and if this test involves math, I'm charging you overtime." "Excellent." Zefko beamed, or at least made the equivalent expression with his shifting patterns. "Prepare to witness the might of superior alien technology." "Sure thing, buddy. Just let me grab my keys and lock up. Can't have people stealing the scratch-off tickets while I'm gone being intellectually humiliated by space people." The inside of the alien ship looked exactly like every sci-fi movie had promised. Lots of blinking lights, smooth surfaces, and that weird humming noise that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Alex followed Zefko down a corridor that kept changing colors, trying not to think about how this was definitely going to make her late for her morning class. "Behold," Zefko announced as massive doors slid open with unnecessary drama. "The Infinite Recursion Chamber." Alex stepped into what could only be described as a mathematician's fever dream. The room was roughly the size of a basketball court, but the walls curved in directions that shouldn't have been physically possible. Floating geometric shapes rotated slowly in midair, occasionally passing through each other while humming different notes. Streams of light connected various crystalline structures that pulsed with equations she couldn't read, and the floor appeared to be made of pure mathematical concepts given physical form. "Impressive, right?" Zefko said smugly. "This chamber represents 500 years of our finest intellectual achievement. The puzzle contained within combines quantum mechanics, 17-dimensional mathematics, temporal paradoxes, and emotional philosophy into one gloriously complex challenge." "Uh-huh," Alex said, pulling out her phone to take a picture. "Does it have Wi-Fi?" "Wi-Fi? Never mind. So what exactly am I supposed to do in here?" Zefko gestured grandly at the swirling chaos around them. "The chamber will present you with a series of interconnected puzzles. Each solution unlocks the next level of complexity. The final answer lies at the convergence of all universal truths, accessible only to minds of the highest intellectual caliber." "Is there a time limit?" "Time limit?" Zefko laughed, a sound like wind chimes having an existential crisis. "My dear primitive creature, our greatest minds have spent centuries just understanding the first layer. Time is meaningless in the face of such complexity. Right, but I've got class at 9, so ideally we could wrap this up before then. Class at 9, Zefko repeated slowly. You think you will complete in 6 hours what has taken our scholars lifetimes to merely contemplate? I don't know, maybe. Depends on how complicated it actually is versus how complicated you think it is. In my experience, smart people have a tendency to overthink things. Zefko's form flickered with what Alex assumed was alien indignation. Overthink? We are the Galactic Council of Superior Beings. We have transcended overthinking. Sure you have. Hey, before we start, is there any chance I could get some coffee? The stuff from the gas station is terrible, but it's better than nothing. We have Klixner extract. It's the finest stimulant in 17 galaxies. Cool. I'll try it. 5 minutes later, Alex was staring at a cup of what looked like purple mud mixed with regret. It tasted exactly as appetizing as it looked. This is horrific, she said cheerfully. Okay, let's get this test started. Do I just walk around and touch things, or is there some kind of instruction manual? The chamber will guide you, Zefko intoned. It responds to consciousness itself, revealing its secrets only to those worthy of understanding. Got it. Consciousness-activated puzzle room. Definitely not overthinking this at all. As if responding to her words, the chamber suddenly came alive with light and sound, patterns swirling faster as the geometric shapes began moving in complex formations. And so it begins, Zefko whispered reverently. Witness the majesty of true intellectual challenge. Alex took a sip of the awful alien coffee and walked toward the center of the room. Yeah, we'll see about that. The chamber was definitely putting on a show. Lights pulsed in mathematical sequences. The floating shapes rearranged themselves into increasingly complex patterns, and somewhere in the distance, Alex could swear she heard the universe humming elevator music. Behold, Zefko announced from the observation deck above. The chamber has activated the first puzzle sequence. Notice how the quantum matrices are aligning with the temporal flux, generators to create 17-dimensional spatial distortions. Alex ignored the commentary and walked around the room, hands in her pockets, occasionally stepping over light beams that seemed important to someone. The whole setup reminded her of something, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. The patterns you see represent the fundamental forces of reality, Zefko continued, his voice filled with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious ceremonies or really good pizza. Each symbol corresponds to a universal constant, and their arrangement follows the sacred mathematics of creation itself. Uh-huh, Alex said, stopping in front of a particularly elaborate light display. So this swirly thing here is supposed to represent what exactly? That is the spiral of infinite possibility. It contains every potential outcome of every decision ever made across all realities. Right. And this glowing cube? The paradox engine? It processes contradictions and transforms them into higher truths. Alex nodded thoughtfully, then started looking around the room with the same expression she used when trying to figure out why the slush machine at work kept breaking down, which was basically every Tuesday. Okay, so you've got your spiral thing doing its spiral thing, your cube doing its cube thing, and all these light patterns connecting them in really impressive ways, she said. But what's the actual question I'm supposed to answer? Zefko paused. The question? Yeah, the question. You know, the thing that has an answer. What am I solving for? You are solving for the ultimate truth of existence itself. But what's the actual question, though? Up in the observation deck, Alex could hear frantic whispering. Apparently, in 500 years of development, nobody had thought to write down what the question was supposed to be. The question is implied, Zefko finally declared. It emerges naturally from understanding the chamber's complexity. Right, Alex said. So you built a really elaborate answer to a question you forgot to ask. That's very thorough of you. She continued her casual stroll around the room, occasionally poking at floating symbols that responded with cascades of light and sound. The aliens in the observation deck were providing running commentary that sounded increasingly nervous. Notice how she fearlessly approaches the nexus of eternal contemplation, one of them whispered. Is she supposed to be touching the reality anchors like that? asked another. Why isn't she taking notes? Shouldn't she be taking notes? Alex, meanwhile, was having flashbacks to every broken piece of equipment she'd ever had to fix. The coffee machine that worked fine until someone tried to clean it properly. The register that crashed whenever you followed the official troubleshooting protocol, but worked perfectly if you just unplugged it and plugged it back in. Her car, which had been making a weird noise for 6 months until she realized the problem wasn't mechanical. Someone had left a Happy Meal toy wedged under the seat. You know, she called up to the observation deck. This whole setup kind of reminds me of the time our ice cream machine broke. Ice cream machine? Zefko's voice cracked slightly. Yeah, it was making this horrible grinding noise and displaying error codes that didn't match anything in the manual. Corporate sent 3 different repair guys, and each one made it worse by following the official diagnostic procedure. The chamber's lights began pulsing faster, as if responding to her words. The machine kept getting more and more complicated fixes until it was basically a mechanical nightmare held together with good intentions and electrical tape. Nobody could figure out why it wasn't working. And what was the solution? Zefko asked, though he sounded like he already knew he wasn't going to like the answer. I jiggled the plug. You jiggled the plug, Zefko repeated slowly. Yep, turns out the whole problem was a loose connection. All those complicated diagnostic procedures and expensive replacement parts, and the solution was literally just making sure the thing was plugged in properly. Alex walked over to the most elaborate part of the chamber, where streams of light converged on a crystalline structure that was humming with what sounded like the mathematical equivalent of anxiety. So let me guess, she continued, examining the base of the crystal structure. You've got this incredibly complex system that's been running for centuries, getting more and more complicated as you keep adding features and upgrades and patches to fix problems that probably stemmed from something really basic. That is not entirely inaccurate, admitted a small voice from the observation deck. And nobody's actually looked at the fundamentals lately because you're all too busy being impressed by how sophisticated everything is. Alex knelt down and peered at the base of the main console, where dozens of crystalline conduits fed into what looked like the alien equivalent of a power strip. Yep, thought so. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a piece of chewing gum, which she stuck onto one of the loose connections. Then she pulled out a roll of duct tape, because working at a gas station had taught her to always carry duct tape, and secured a wobbly crystal that was clearly not seated properly. The chamber's chaotic light show immediately settled into a steady, peaceful glow. What did you just do? Zefko's voice was barely a whisper. Basic maintenance. Your whole system was running on unstable connections and trying to compensate with increasingly complex workarounds. Kind of like how our corporate computer system keeps adding new security protocols to fix problems caused by the old security protocols. She stood up and brushed off her hands. The question you forgot to ask was probably something simple, right? Like, what's the meaning of life, or how do you achieve universal peace, or something equally obvious? The meaning of life, Zefko confirmed weakly. Cool. The answer's 42, by the way. Some writer figured that out like 50 years ago. Pretty sure it was meant as a joke, but honestly, that's probably the most accurate answer you're going to get to a question that vague. She pulled out a sticky note from her pocket. Gas station workers learned to always carry sticky notes, and wrote, "You can't," in large letters, then stuck it to the main console. There you go. That's your answer to the real question, which is, can you prove humans are intellectually inferior? The answer is you can't, because intelligence isn't about how complicated you can make something. It's about how simply you can solve it. The observation deck was completely silent. Also, Alex added, you might want to upgrade your power management system. This whole setup is probably using about 10 times more energy than it needs to. I can recommend some good extension cords if you want. That's when the screaming started. Impossible! Zefko's form flickered like a TV with bad reception. 500 years of development, 17 different committees, peer review. Emergency council session? Shrieked another voice. Somebody call the engineers. We are the engineers. Then who do we blame? The chamber's lighting switched to what Alex assumed was alien emergency mode. Lots of flashing red and an alarm that sounded like a computer having a panic attack. Hey, Alex called up to them. Can someone give me a ride back to Earth? I've still got 3 hours left on my shift. and my manager gets really cranky when people don't show up. But the aliens were too busy having collective nervous breakdowns to answer. 2 hours later, Alex was back at the gas Engo, restocking the energy drinks she'd abandoned earlier. The aliens had been so eager to get rid of her that they'd dropped her off at the first convenience store they could find, which unfortunately was the 24-hour place 3 towns over. She'd had to call her co-worker Jake to come pick her up, and explaining why she needed a ride from a gas station 30 miles away at 5 in the morning had been more challenging than solving the alien puzzle. "So let me get this straight," Jake said for the 3rd time as he helped her arrange the Red Bull display. "Aliens abducted you. You fixed their computer with chewing gum and duct tape, and they had a collective mental breakdown?" "Pretty much. Oh, and I'm probably going to be late for Professor Chen's class because interdimensional travel apparently doesn't account for Earth traffic patterns. You know nobody's going to believe this, right?" "That's fine. I took pictures." Alex showed him her phone, which was full of blurry shots of the alien ship and the puzzle chamber. Although honestly, they could be from any sci-fi movie. The special effects weren't that impressive. Jake shook his head. "Only you would get abducted by aliens and complain about their production values." What Alex did not tell Jake was that she'd figured out what the aliens were really up to about 5 minutes into their dramatic explanation. The whole test of human intelligence thing was just a complicated way of asking whether humans deserved respect, and the answer to that question was always going to be subjective anyway. You can't prove or disprove respect with a puzzle, no matter how many dimensions you add to it. The sticky note she'd left behind, "You can't," wasn't just the solution to their test. It was the answer to their real question. Can you definitively prove that one species is superior to another? The answer was no, you can't, because intelligence comes in too many different forms to measure with a single test. But explaining all that would have taken forever, and she'd really wanted to get back to work. Meanwhile, somewhere in deep space, the Galactic Council was in full crisis mode. "Order! Order!" Vexathera was slamming her gavel so hard it was leaving dents in the podium. "We need to address the failure of test protocol Omega-7. "It wasn't a failure," Quindar said miserably. "It was a complete system reformation achieved through the application of primitive adhesive materials." "She used chewing gum, Quindar." "Chewing gum." "Very effective chewing gum," admitted Zefko, who was still flickering occasionally. "Our engineers have been studying the sample she left behind. Apparently it's specifically designed for temporary bonding applications while maintaining flexibility under stress. Quite ingenious, really." "Are you defending human technology?" Vexathara's eyes blazed. "I'm just saying that maybe we've been approaching this wrong. Perhaps instead of trying to prove our superiority, we should consider the possibility that different species have different types of intelligence, all of which have value in their own contexts." The council stared at him in shocked silence. "What I mean," Zefko continued hastily, "is that we should obviously design a much more complex test for next time. One that can't possibly be solved with adhesive materials." "Test 2.0, someone shouted from the back of the chamber. "More dimensions," yelled another. "Emotional mathematics." And so the Galactic Council began planning their next attempt to prove human inferiority, completely missing the point of the sticky note that was now stuck to their most advanced computer system. Back on Earth, Alex finally made it to her philosophy class, where Professor Martinez was discussing the nature of intelligence and consciousness. She listened with half an ear while updating her resume on her phone. Under special skills, she added, interdimensional problem solving, alien technology maintenance, basic universal diplomacy. Under work experience, she added, temporary consultant, Galactic Council of Superior Beings. She figured it was probably worth mentioning, even if nobody would believe it. Besides, the way her luck was going, they'd probably be back next Tuesday with an even more complicated test. And she'd be ready for them, armed with more duct tape and the kind of practical common sense that apparently didn't exist anywhere else in the universe. The universe, as it turned out, was a lot weirder and a lot simpler than anyone expected. Just another Tuesday, really.